Good morning. Happy Sunday. Welcome to my thought for the day. We finished 1 John, and I was going to go to 2 John and 3 John, but they're very short letters, and they are very much on the same topics that we've looked at in 1 John. So if you get a chance to read them, it wouldn't take you more than half an hour to read, well, less than that, to read those two little books, 2 and 3 John. So I thought we'd go to Peter. So 1 Peter. And just some thoughts on the greeting at the beginning of the letter, the first letter of Peter. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, chosen and destined by God the Father, and sanctified by the Spirit for obedience to Jesus Christ and for sprinkling with his blood. May grace and peace be multiplied to you. What a rich couple of verses. But the thought I had as I was reading them was that here is Peter. Peter, who was the first great leader of the early church, does not use a greater title for himself than apostle of Jesus Christ. All the disciples, when Jesus had appointed them, became apostles. And he doesn't say the leader of the church in Jerusalem or the leader of the church of Jesus Christ or anything like that. He says an apostle of Jesus Christ. Position is not important in the Church of Christ. You know, the Church of Jesus, we are all equal. We're all born again. And if we have different roles to play, that's our calling. But it doesn't make us any more important than anybody else. Whatever role God has called you to is the role he wants you to fulfill. If it's to be someone who prays in the background for others who have a more public kind of ministry, then that's a wonderful thing. You know, every missionary, every person who serves overseas has a huge number of people supporting them, either financially or by prayer. And each one is important. You need everyone in the whole system to keep a missionary on, say, a person who represents MAF, Mission Aviation Fellowship, which I know a lot about. Every one of their overseas workers is supported by a network of people who give and pray for them specifically. And that's a wonderful privilege. And whatever God has called you to, there's no hierarchy in the church of any meaning at all. And we are all one in Christ Jesus. And Peter, if you remember, that the last thing we read about Peter in the Gospel of John is Jesus commissioning him to feed his sheep and care for his sheep. And here is Peter writing to members of that flock of Jesus who have been dispersed, forced out of their homes in huge areas of the known world at that time, the Roman Empire at that time, forced out of their homes, dispersed all over the place because of their faith. Calling it the exiles of the dispersion is likening it to what happened in the Old Testament when Israel or Judah were conquered by other nations and the residents dispersed so that they couldn't rise in rebellion against the invading power. And they were known as the dispersion because they went all around the world. And so it was, you remember in Acts, after the death of Stephen in chapter 8, and Saul as he was then, but Paul was pursuing people. They were dispersed from Jerusalem. They fled because there was upheaval in Jerusalem, and there was a lot of anger against the Christians and violence and putting in prison and all sorts of things going on against the Christians, and they were dispersed. And that dispersion spread the gospel to every corner of the known world, of the Roman Empire and beyond. And here is Peter as the supreme shepherd of the sheep, appointed by Jesus to be the first great shepherd after him. And here he is writing a letter to the sheep that have been scattered by wolves. The analogy is very close, isn't it? And he is writing to them to encourage them and to strengthen them and to help them in their work to be the supreme shepherd or pastor of the sheep that God had given to him. And he probably wrote this letter from Rome, where there was greater persecution, and of course under Nero, we believe that Peter died in Rome, and there was a lot of persecution. And he's writing to those who've lost everything, really. When you are thrown out of your home and forced to leave, you have to begin a new life. And they hung on to their faith, and they followed Jesus despite the fact that they had had to leave home and house and possibly family. We don't know. And here is Peter being that wonderful shepherd. Whatever role God has called you to, be faithful in it. Don't be envious of somebody else's role that has more, seems to be more attractive or more noticed or whatever. The good Lord knows what he's called you to. He knows what he's called me to. And all he requires of us is to be faithful in what we do for him. To be faithful in doing the things that he has asked us to do. Because that's all we are, really, is obedient servants. And that second verse says, sanctified by the Spirit for obedience to Jesus Christ. We are servants. We are friends. We are elevated beyond servants to sonhood, or son and daughterhood, prince and princesshood. I don't know how you say it. But at the core, it is to be obedient. It is to do because he loved us and gave himself for us. So that's my beginning thought on 1 Peter. God bless you. Have a great day. I hope you find somewhere, either online or in person, where you can worship today and give thanks to God for his care for you and for those people who shepherd you, who are there for you, who encourage you and help you. Pray for them, that God will give them all they need to fulfill the job that God has given them, and for you to fulfill the work God has called you to. God bless you. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.